A brutal snowstorm tore through a small forest village, leaving destruction in its wake. That morning, Bear, the loyal dog, refused to stop barking until Owen followed him to the edge of the woods. There, buried beneath
Easy,
fallen
boy.
trees, a
Stay right
dying
here.
female bobcat struggled for life. Owen rushed her back to his cabin, unaware he was stepping into a dangerous mistake. This story will pull you between the heart of a man and the wild. If it moves you, subscribe so you never miss a tale like this. The forest lay buried beneath a bruised sky of fading snowlight, the air still trembling from the storm's retreat. Owen Hale stepped out of his wooden cabin, the breath of winter clinging to his beard like silver frost. At 53, Owen carried the frame of a man forged by decades of hardship, broad-shouldered, weathered, with deep lines carved into his face that hinted at long marches through foreign deserts and nights spent wrestling ghosts only he could see. His dark wool coat hung heavily over his sturdy frame, and beneath it, the scars on his arms tightened in the cold, old reminders of battles he never fully left behind. He had learned to greet mornings in silence, letting the quiet do what words once could not. But the silence shattered when Bear began barking. The old shepherd-mix dog barreled through the snowdrifts with urgency. Bear was 10 years old, stocky with a dark brindled coat and a muzzle graying like storm clouds. His eyes, a warm, intelligent amber, held both loyalty and the weary wisdom of a companion who had been at Owen's side since his discharge. Bear was usually calm, almost meditative, never raising his voice unless something was terribly wrong. Which is why, when he tugged at Owen's coat and barked toward the tree line, Owen felt a pulse of dread grip his chest. The storm had ripped the forest apart. Branches lay twisted and broken, trunks scattered like bones across the snow. Owen trudged through the wreckage after Bear, his boots sinking deep, each step echoing the steady rhythm of a man who had walked through worse landscapes both inside and out. He kept his thoughts guarded, but a faint unease stirred. He had seen enough of nature's cruelty to know it didn't spare the small or the helpless. Bear stopped abruptly at the base of a toppled pine, whining. Owen followed his gaze and froze. Beneath the weight of a thick pine limb, a small movement flickered, a trembling breath, barely there. As he knelt closer, the shape emerged. A bobcat, young, perhaps barely past kittenhood. The creature's spotted coat was clumped with ice, and its body lay half buried under the snow. Its tufted ears drooped, and one paw twitched weakly as though fighting against some dream of escape. This was a female, her frame slender but built with the compact strength of her species. Even in distress, there was something fierce woven into the slope of her shoulders and the defiant set of her jaw. Owen's stomach tightened. He had seen wounded creatures before. Some had lived, many had not. But there was something in the bobcat's eyes, even through the haze of pain, that held a raw, undeniable determination. A kind of fire he recognized too well from broken soldiers refusing to die on cold battlegrounds. "Easy, girl," Owen murmured, his voice low and steady, the same tone he once used to calm trembling hands belonging to men younger than he had any right to command. Bear sat beside him, ears flattened, watching, with quiet concern. The tree limb pinning the bobcat was heavy, but Owen's body still remembered how to summon strength when it mattered. He dug his boots into the snow, gripped the frozen bark, and heaved. Muscles strained, pain shot through his shoulder, an old wound flaring, but he kept pushing until the limb rolled aside with a muffled thud. The bobcat let out a thin, rasping breath. She tried to crawl, but her legs gave way. Owen slid his arms beneath her gently. She weighed so little, far less than her wild lineage suggested. Her fur was cold enough to make him wince, and as he lifted her close he could feel the faint tremor of her heartbeat against his chest. Fragile, stubborn, alive. Owen hesitated. Every rule, every piece of training whispered in his mind. Do not interfere. Nature must run its course. Wild animals belong to the forest, not to him. But another voice rose. A quieter, older voice carved into him through years of saving what could be saved when the world went dark. He had never walked away from a life that still fought to hold on. He wrapped the bobcat in his coat. "Come on," he whispered, more to himself than the creature. Bear trotted beside him as he made his way back to the cabin through the eerie stillness left behind by the storm. Inside, the warmth of the fire met them, soft and welcoming. Owen set the bobcat near the hearth, rubbing her fur dry with an old blanket. Her breathing hitched but steadied, her eyelids fluttering with exhausted determination. For a long moment, Owen just watched her, watched the rise and fall of her small ribs, the stubborn flick of her ears, the way her eyes opened enough to meet his. In those eyes he saw not fear, but an echo of every creature, human or otherwise, that had pulled itself through hell and refused to surrender. An unexpected warmth stirred in Owen's chest, something gentle he hadn't felt in years. "Echo," he murmured at last. "That's what you are, a voice that comes back when it isn't supposed to." The bobcat blinked slowly, as if accepting the name. Bear lay down beside her, protective, his tail sweeping gently across the wooden floor. Owen sat back, letting the fire's glow wash over them, aware of a quiet shift in the air. The cabin, once filled with silence heavy as old grief, now felt different. Warmer, fuller, alive. And as the wind outside whispered through the recovering forest, Owen knew one thing with steady clarity. This storm had brought him more than destruction. It had brought him echo. Morning seeped gently into the cabin, the pale winter light slipping through the frost-streaked windows and settling over the worn wooden floorboards. Owen Hale stood near the hearth with Echo curled at his feet, the small bobcat sleeping fitfully. The fire had softened the stiffness in her limbs, but not the pain buried deep beneath her spotted coat. Bear lay close by, his brindled frame curled protectively, ears twitching whenever Echo stirred. Outside, the forest was beginning to heal from the storm's rampage, but inside Owen's chest, an unease grew heavier by the hour. He moved quietly around the cabin, preparing what little he could: warm water, clean cloth, a few herbs he remembered using back in remote deployments when medics were miles away. But as he unwrapped the blanket from Echo's leg, a sharp breath escaped him. Something about the wound was wrong. The bruising was one thing, but the deep, angered cut, raw at the edge, felt like more than a fallen branch. He straightened, wiped the sweat from his brow, and reached for the old radio on the shelf. Static crackled, but when a familiar voice answered, he felt the tension in his shoulders ease. "Sarah, I need you to come over, quietly." He didn't explain further. He didn't have to. Sarah Whitlock arrived less than 30 minutes later. She stepped through the door and stamped the snow from her boots. Sarah was in her early 40s, tall and lean with a kind of wiry strength honed from years tending farm animals in harsh weather. Her hair, chestnut brown and streaked with early silver, was tied in a messy braid over one shoulder. Her face carried the soft resilience of someone who had seen hardship, yet kept compassion as her compass. Most notable were her eyes, sharp hazel flecked with green, the eyes of a woman who could read an animal's pain long before it cried out. Her late husband, a forest ranger, had died in an avalanche years ago, leaving her with a quiet grief that manifested as fierce protectiveness toward the creatures of the valley. She knelt by Echo without speaking, her breath forming small ghosts over the bobcat's fragile body. When she touched Echo's leg, Echo let out a weak growl, low but trembling. Sarah murmured gently, her voice low and soothing, the tone instinctively bridging worlds between wild and human. Owen watched her expertly clean the wound, her movements precise and steady. But when she leaned closer, her brows knotted. "Owen," she said, her voice dropping, "this isn't just from the tree." He crouched beside her. "I thought the same. What is it?" She pointed to the gash, tracing its jagged shape with a gloved finger. "This is from metal, a snare. the kind people set for foxes or bobcats. Her eyes narrowed. And not just anyone's snare. See the deep bite on this edge? Jacob's traps leave marks like that. He files the metal too sharp. The name brought a familiar bitterness to Owen's mouth. Jacob, Hartley, mid-50s, narrow-eyed, always wrapped in suspicion like a second skin. Jacob had a hunched, wiry build, ash-colored stubble, and a scowl so permanent that it seemed stitched into his face. He'd lived alone too long, carrying the paranoia of a man convinced the world owed him something. His hens were his kingdom, and any creature that ventured too close became an enemy he vowed to eliminate. More than once, Owen had seen Jacob drag a cage of injured animals to the sheriff's office, face lit with grim satisfaction. Sarah's voice softened, though worry tightened its edges. If Jacob finds out you have her, he'll scream to the whole town. And if Olivia hears— Owen sighed. She'll shout it from the church bell. Sarah nodded. Exactly. Olivia Harper hears everything. She's like a winter wind, gets in through every crack. Olivia was a stout woman in her 60s, wrapped in heavy coats year-round with thinning gray curls and sharp eyes. Her voice carried far, and so did her fondness for gossip. The Valley's secrets rarely survived more than a night once they touched her ears. Sarah sat back on her heels. And then there's Logan. Owen knew the name alone changed the weight of the room. Sheriff Logan Reeves was a man carved from order and discipline. Early 50s, tall with a square jaw, steel gray hair cropped short, and a trimmed beard that made him look perpetually stern. He had once served in wildlife enforcement and carried those rules into his badge with unwavering resolve. Logan wasn't cruel, but he lived by the book, and if he learned Owen was harboring a wild bobcat, especially an injured one, he'd have Echo transferred out of Owen's care before sundown. "He won't look the other way," Owen muttered. "Not for this." Sarah looked up at him, her expression serious. "We have to be careful. If Logan or Olivia or Jacob finds out, you might lose her. She's not ready to be taken." Echo shifted weakly, lifting her head for just a moment. Her eyes met Owen's, and something inside him tightened. He didn't want to lose the fragile spark of trust he had just earned from her. That spark was too rare, too necessary after years of loneliness wrapping around him like a cold fog. Sarah pressed a final bandage into place and packed her tools. "I'll check on her again tonight. Keep her warm. Keep her hidden." She placed a hand on Owen's arm. "And keep your guard up. You're stepping onto thin ice, Owen. One wrong foot and she's gone." Owen nodded quietly. He watched Sarah leave, then turned back to Echo, resting by the fire. Bear shifted closer, placing a gentle paw near her side as if promising protection. And Owen understood the truth settling over the cabin like falling snow. From this moment forward, he was not just keeping Echo alive. He was keeping her secret. The night settled heavily over the valley, the kind of cold darkness that pressed close to the skin and made every sound echo sharper than it should. Owen Hale stood outside his cabin, breath misting in the frigid air as he scanned the tree line. Since Sarah's visit, his nerves had stretched thin, pulled taut by the knowledge that one careless moment could cost Echo her life. Behind him, Bear padded quietly, the dog's dark brindled coat barely visible under the moon's fractured glow. The old shepherd mix seemed to sense Owen's unease, staying closer than usual, tail low, nose twitching at scents drifting on the wind. Earlier that afternoon, Owen and Sarah had moved Echo from the cabin to the small storage barn behind the house. The barn, built decades ago from weathered red pine, had thick insulated walls and a heavy door latched with steel. Inside it held an old wood stove, stacked hay, and tools Owen no longer used. It wasn't warm enough for comfort, but with the stove burning and extra blankets wrapped around Echo's fragile body, it was safer than keeping her in the cabin where any visitor might stumble upon her. Sarah had chosen a quiet corner for Echo, placing the bobcat in a wide wooden crate lined with soft cloth. Echo had curled up tightly, her tufted ears flicking whenever the wind hit the barn walls, but her breathing had steadied. Still, her eyes kept drifting toward the door as if she were listening for something far away. And she was. By dusk, Owen noticed her restlessness. Echo paced weakly inside the crate, tail twitching, ears swiveling, her patterned fur rising at sudden noises. Something in the forest was calling to her, some instinct woven into her blood long before she was born. When she lifted her head and stared toward the barn window, Owen felt a pang of recognition. She was waiting. Sarah had left shortly before nightfall, stepping into the snow with her medical bag slung over her shoulder. She'd cast a quick glance at the surrounding woods and warned Owen again about Jacob, her expression tightening into something close to a grimace. If he suspects anything, he won't stop. You know how he is. Owen knew more than she said. Jacob was the kind of man who feared what he didn't understand. And fear made him dangerous. Owen secured the barn door and trudged back toward the cabin, only to notice something off near the tree line. The snow had been smooth earlier, untouched except for the tracks he and Sarah had made, but now faint impressions marred the powder. Boot prints, heavy ones. He knelt beside them, brushing cold crystals aside. The depth and angle revealed someone tall, someone who walked with a slight stagger in the left step, as if that leg were weaker. Jacob Hartley walked exactly like that. Years of a twisted knee from a logging accident had left him with a distinctive, uneven stride. Owen's jaw clenched. It meant Jacob had been here, and recently. Inside the barn, Echo suddenly let out a low growl, soft, trembling, but urgent. Owen's heart hammered as he rose to his feet. Bear barked once, sharp and warning. A voice called out from the darkness. "Hale? You in there?" Harsh, suspicious. Jacob. Jacob emerged from behind a tree, lantern raised high. He was wrapped in a thick sheepskin coat, though it hung awkwardly over his narrow, stooped frame. His face, long and angular, was half hidden beneath a tangle of gray stubble, while his small eyes glinted with that familiar paranoid shine. He had always been a man shaped by loss. The barn fire that killed half his hens last year had hardened him, sharpening his fear into something brittle and aggressive. "What are you hiding back there?" Jacob demanded, stepping closer. "I saw tracks, big ones, and I heard noises, something wild." Owen steadied his voice. "Storm brought animals closer. Happens every winter." Jacob snorted. "Not buying it. Something's in that barn. I can smell it." He shoved his lantern forward, its light slicing across the snow toward the barn door. The boot prints Owen had just examined glowed beneath it like evidence in a trial. Bear growled low, hackles rising. Owen placed a hand on the dog's head. "Go home, Jacob. You're imagining things." Jacob's voice rose, brittle and shaking with anger. "If you're harboring a predator on your property, I'll have Sheriff Logan down here myself. I won't let some damn wild cat wipe out what I've worked for." The threat hung heavy in the air. Owen's pulse kicked hard, but he forced himself to hold still, shoulders squared. "Leave," he said quietly. Not shouted, not pleaded, commanded. Jacob glared at him, the cold biting into the sharp lines of his face. Then he spat into the snow, turned and limped away, the lantern swinging like a hostile star between the trees. Owen waited until the dark swallowed Jacob's figure before he exhaled. He hurried back to the barn. Inside, Echo paced restlessly, her tail flicking against the crate. She hissed softly, not at him, but at the forest beyond. Owen knelt beside her, and she finally settled enough for him to place a hand gently over her back. Her heartbeat was rapid, trembling, as if something deep within her refused to calm. Minutes later, the sound came. A distant roar, low, vibrating, ancient, rolled through the woods like a tremor. Echo rose instantly, ears erect, her wounded leg trembling but her spirit surging toward the cry. Owen froze. The sound was unmistakable. A male bobcat, calling, searching. The roar echoed again, closer this time, threading through the bare branches like a haunting plea. Echo responded with a small, desperate chirp, pressing her face against the wooden slats of the crate. Bear whimpered softly, and Owen finally understood. The animal out there wasn't just any bobcat. It was Echo's mate, relentlessly searching the forest, refusing to give up. As Echo pressed toward the sound, shaking with recognition and longing, Owen saw the truth settle heavy as winter. Her secret wasn't just threatened by Jacob, it was being pulled by the wild itself. The wind cut sharply through the midnight forest, carrying scents of pine, frost, and something far more fragile, fear. Owen Hale sprinted across the snow, his breath burning in his lungs, his boots pounding through the tangled remains of the storm-stricken woods. Bear ran ahead of him, the shepherd mix's brindled coat ghosting through the pale moonlight, his paws leaving deep, urgent prints in the powder. Owen's heart hammered as he followed, every sense sharpened by instinct and dread. Echo had escaped, bolted straight through the shattered barn window like a streak of wild panic, glass scattering behind her like frozen tears, and Owen knew why. The bobcat's restlessness these past nights, her trembling whenever the wind shifted, the way her ears snapped toward the tree line, it had all been leading to this. Something had pulled her into the forest, something older than cages or bandages. But he also knew what had pushed her. Jacob. Minutes earlier, Owen had spotted Jacob Hartley's silhouette near the barn, crouched low, breath fogging through the slits of his sheepskin collar. Jacob's narrow frame, lean from years of suspicion and manual farm work, had blended with the shadows, but his lantern glow had betrayed him. He looked like a man carved from frost and bitterness, stubble graying, eyes sharp with paranoia. When the barn window shattered and Echo burst into the night, Jacob let out a startled curse, convinced he'd uncovered proof of the predator he'd insisted Owen was hiding. His presence had only heightened Echo's terror, and now she was out there, hurt, weak, and exposed. Owen pressed forward as Bear suddenly veered left, barking once, then disappearing behind a cluster of downed birches. Owen followed, ducking under branches heavy with snow. He muttered a curse when a limb scraped his cheek, leaving a stinging, shallow cut. His body ached from the cold, but he forced himself on. Bear's bark echoed again, closer this time, laced with urgency. Owen stumbled into a narrow ravine, the moonlight fractured by jagged rock walls. At the base of the ravine, half hidden in shadow, was a small opening, a natural hollow worn smooth by time and weather. Bear stood just outside it, tail rigid, body tense, ears pinned. A warning stance. Owen's pulse jumped. "Bear," he said softly. "Easy." He crouched and peered inside. There she was, Echo. Her small spotted body lay curled, sides rising and falling in shallow gasps. Her eyes fluttered open, dim but aware. Beside her, a larger silhouette shifted, a full-grown male bobcat. The animal was magnificent despite its gauntness. Broad chest, thick winter coat dusted with snow, long white whiskers twitching, and tufted ears sharp as blades. His eyes, wide and amber, locked onto Owen with a feral, unwavering fire. The male bobcat rose onto his paws, muscles rippling beneath his coat. His fur bristled along his spine. A guttural, vibrating sound rolled from deep in his chest, a sound that warned violence and grief intertwined. He stepped protectively over Echo, his body forming a living barrier. Bear growled in response, baring his teeth, fur rising like a wave of bristles. Owen didn't hesitate. "Bear, back." His voice had steel, the old commander in him resurfacing. Bear, trained by years of companionship and shared survival, obeyed instantly, retreating a few steps though every line of his body screamed tension. The male bobcat's tail flicked sharply, his claws sinking into the earth. One wrong move, and he would lunge. Owen raised his hands slowly, palms open. He forced his breathing steady, even as adrenaline thudded in his blood. He knew animals read hearts better than humans. Panic would kill him. Calm might save them all. "It's all right," he whispered, stepping closer with caution and reverence. "I'm not taking her from you, I'm helping her." The bobcat's growl deepened, echoing off the stone walls. Owen remembered using this voice once on a battlefield, kneeling beside a wounded soldier as mortars screamed overhead. The same quiet, grounding tone. "Easy," he murmured again. "Just easy." Echo's head lifted weakly. She mewed, a soft, pained sound, and nudged the male with her nose. Her eyes drifted from him to Owen, then back again, as if silently urging both sides toward peace. The male hesitated. His chest expanded in a slow breath. His ears flicked, uncertainty breaking through the ferocity. Time stretched thin like ice beneath weight. Then, something shifted. The male bobcat's eyes dulled from blazing threat to wary calculation. He stepped back half a foot, no longer poised to attack but not yet offering trust. His gaze remained locked on Owen, but the killing intent had ebbed. Owen took the chance. He knelt beside Echo, moving with deliberate gentleness. She leaned into his hand, trembling, exhausted. Carefully, he slid one arm beneath her, lifting her against his chest. Her weight felt even lighter than the first time. Too light. As Owen rose, the male bobcat let out a low chuff, not a growl, but a warning to be careful, to be worthy of the mercy he was being given. Owen nodded once, silently promising he understood. He backed away slowly, Bear falling in step beside him. Snow whispered beneath their boots as they climbed from the ravine. They made it halfway across the clearing when a shrill gasp cut through the quiet. "Oh, heavens! Owen Hale! What is that in your arms?" Owen froze. Standing rigid near the fence line was Olivia Harper, bundled in 3 mismatched coats and a knitted scarf that nearly swallowed her chin. Olivia was stout and round-faced, her gray curls frizzing wildly beneath a wool hat. Her eyes, sharp, nosy, bright as cold marbles, widened in horror. Her gloved hand flew up, trembling with dramatic urgency, reaching for the phone she kept in her coat pocket. She didn't blink. She didn't breathe. "Sheriff Logan needs to hear about this right now." Before Owen could speak, she was already dialing, her voice rising like a siren in the frosty air. And with that, his act of compassion became a storm far worse than the one that had brought Echo to him. The morning broke with a brittle stillness, the kind that seemed to hang in the air just before judgment fell. Owen Hale stood on the porch, Echo nestled weakly in his arms, wrapped in a clean flannel cloth. The snow beneath his boots glowed faintly under the gray dawn, and the mountains behind the cabin loomed quiet and heavy, as though holding their breath. Bear stayed close, his brindled coat brushed with frost, eyes flicking anxiously between Owen and the road leading toward town. Even he sensed the shift that was coming. The crunch of tires on frozen ground came before the sound of the engine, and dread pressed deep into Owen's ribcage. A gray SUV rolled into view. Sheriff Logan Reeves stepped out, a tall man with broad shoulders, a rigid posture, and the austere calm of someone built from rules rather than instinct. Logan's face was sharply cut, angular jaw marked with a short salt-and-pepper beard. His uniform hung neatly on his muscular frame, immaculate as ever, and his steel-gray eyes reflected the same sternness that had once made him the most respected wildlife officer in the region. Years ago, he had lost a young ranger under his command, a mistake he'd never forgiven himself for, and since then, he had lived by absolute adherence to the law. Emotion was a luxury he rarely allowed himself. "You received Olivia's call," Owen said quietly, but Logan offered no answer. He simply walked closer, each step sinking into the snow with precise weight. Behind Logan appeared Sarah Whitlock, wrapped in a thick olive parka, cheeks flushed from rushing up the icy path. Her chestnut-gray braid swayed as she hurried to Owen's side, her expression tight with worry. Logan lifted a hand. Before either of you say anything, let me see the animal." Owen hesitated, then peeled back the flannel blanket just enough to reveal Echo's injured side. The bobcat let out a weak hiss, but her trembling eased when Owen's hand instinctively settled on her back. Logan knelt, studying the wound with a trained eye. His brows furrowed. "She's in bad shape," he muttered. "This wasn't caused by a branch alone." Sarah stepped forward. She was caught in one of Jacob's snares before the storm hit. Logan's jaw tightened, although his face remained unreadable. "You're accusing him." "I'm stating fact," Sarah replied evenly. "And you know as well as I do he's been setting illegal traps near the ridge." Owen watched Logan absorb this in silence. A muscle feathered in the sheriff's cheek, a rare sign of internal conflict. He stood and faced Owen squarely. "You know the law. Harboring a wild animal is an offense, especially an injured predator." Owen's grip tightened around Echo. "Let me help her. I'm not keeping her as a pet. I'm keeping her alive." Sarah nodded firmly beside him. "Without Owen, she'll die, Logan." Logan's breath steamed in the cold as he turned his gaze toward the forest, the mountains, then finally to Echo again. He exhaled slowly. 15 days, he said at last, voice low but decisive. "No more." He pointed between them. "You keep her hidden. You keep her safe. And when she's healed enough to survive out there, you release her. I'll come personally to make sure it's done." Relief sagged through Owen's shoulders, though the burden remained heavy. "You have my word." Logan gave a curt nod, then strode back to his SUV. Sarah let out a long breath, and Bear pressed his head against Owen's thigh as if sensing that, for now, the storm had passed. The days that followed became a rhythm of quiet devotion. Owen tended to Echo with gentle hands, giving her small, nourishing meals, changing her bandages, and keeping the wood stove burning. Bear stayed beside her constantly, his protective instincts blossoming into something almost paternal. Sarah visited daily, checking Echo's progress, adjusting treatment, and offering calm advice whenever Owen's worry slipped too close to breaking. By day 10, Echo could stand long enough to stretch. By day 12, she managed a few wobbly steps. By day 14, her eyes gleamed with that wild spark again, an ancient knowing that she did not belong to walls or human care. And on the 15th morning, Owen understood what he had been preparing for all along. He carried Echo across the snowy clearing, Bear trotting close behind. Sarah walked with them until the tree line, her hand brushing Echo's head one final time. Sheriff Logan waited there as promised, arms folded, breath steady. At the border, where forest met open land, a shape appeared among the pines. The male Bobcat. He stood tall, shoulders broad beneath his thick winter coat, amber eyes burning with striking intelligence. He took one slow step forward, then another, his gaze locked on Echo, hope swelling in every inch of him. Owen knelt, lowering Echo gently into the snow. She looked at him with a depth that pierced straight through his chest, a look of trust, gratitude, and farewell. "Go on, girl," he whispered. Echo turned, stumbled once, then walked toward the male. He leaned down, touching his forehead to hers, a silent reunion that felt older than language. Owen watched until their spotted coats disappeared into the pines. Days rolled into weeks. Winter thawed. Streams woke. Trees budded. One quiet evening in spring, Bear suddenly bolted to the porch, barking, not in alarm, but in joyful recognition. Owen stepped outside. There, at the edge of the tree line, stood Echo. Stronger, sleek, eyes bright with life. Beside her was the male Bobcat, and weaving between their legs were two tiny kits, their fur soft and spotted, their ears too big for their small heads. Echo watched Owen for several heartbeats, as if gifting him one final echo of the bond they shared. Only when he smiled did she turn, guiding her family back into the wilderness where they belonged. At the end of this tale, when Echo returned from the wild with her mate and their newborn kits, it felt like more than a reunion. It felt like a reminder that miracles still move quietly through this world, working in places where fear once lived, blooming in hearts that dared to show kindness even when no one was watching. Some would say it was simply nature taking its course. But those who have lived long enough, those who have lost and loved and kept going anyway, know that moments like these carry the soft imprint of something greater. Perhaps it was the Lord's gentle hand guiding Owen through the storm, giving Echo the strength to fight back, opening Sheriff Logan's heart just wide enough to let mercy in. Perhaps it was his way of showing that every act of compassion, no matter how small, sends ripples through the world that return to us in ways we could never predict. And maybe that is the quiet truth behind this story. When we choose kindness, we make room for God to work His wonders. In our everyday lives, that same miracle waits. It waits in the way we treat strangers, in the patience we show our families, in the courage to help, even when no one is there to praise us. This world can feel cold at times, but grace has a way of finding those who keep their hearts open. If this story touched something in you, I invite you to share it so others might feel the same hope. Leave a comment, tell us where you're watching from, or share a moment when compassion changed your day. And if you'd like more stories that lift the heart and remind us that the world still holds goodness worth believing in, don't hesitate to subscribe. May the Lord bless you, protect you, and watch over your home, just as He watched over Owen and Echo in the quiet snow of that winter night.